A child initially gets scared when seeing the wolf fur that his father is wearing. However, soon after, he realizes that the person underneath the fur is his father. The sense of danger is replaced by safety, and the fear disappears. Now, the wolf fur is just a costume, and the child starts to relax and laugh. The problem isn't the fur itself. It's the belief that it's a wolf. The child didn't react to the fur, but to the perception and belief that there was a wolf underneath it. This is similar to what happens in almost all of our psychology. People react not to the emotions themselves, but to the belief that there is a problem underneath them. But when we realize that these emotions are just costumes, and there is no wolf underneath, our fear, anxiety, and worries disappear. When we understand that the problem is not a disorder or illness, but simply a shift in emotions, and that our psychology hasn't been broken, but only changed, our sense of danger fades, and emotions no longer have the same effect on us. Psychologist İzzet Güllü, with the psychological model built on this philosophy, has helped thousands of people solve their problems in their homes. The trauma and serotonin myths are collapsing, and the belief that therapy and treatment are impossible is being shattered. Remember, it's not the emotions, but the perceptions that are disturbed. And not only our fathers, but our emotions also protect us. In this channel, we begin to explore the unique psychological model developed by psychologist İzzet Güllü, which is the product of his 25 years of experience and helps solve problems in people's homes. Please watch this series until the end. When you benefit from it, please support us so that it can reach more people. As you know, we often think that our psychology affects us. But is it really our psychology that affects us? Does the experience we call being affected emerge after a psychology has formed, meaning the effect is dependent on psychology? Couldn't this struggle arise from our perceptions of psychology? When we get wet because of the rain, does it mean that the rain is what made us wet? Actually, it's because we didn't use an umbrella. Similarly, could we be affected because we don't correctly perceive the psychology that emerges, meaning we don't respond to it properly? The industry says it's an anxiety disorder, a mood disorder, and labels emotions as disordered. But can our psychology really be disordered? Can our psychology be ill? Is trembling a disease? If it happens during a seizure, yes. But if it happens in the cold, it's not. This trembling is a natural and healthy response of the body to the cold. In the same way, is our psychology disordered, or is it a natural response to something? Are our emotions and thoughts disrupted, or is it our perception of them that's distorted? If what's disrupted is our perception, then why should the body's response to this disrupted perception be considered an illness? If the food we eat is spoiled, do we call the stomach's response to it a stomach illness? If perceptions are disturbed, they should be corrected. If emotions are disturbed, emotions should be treated. But could it be that we're trying to treat emotions when the real issue is our distorted perceptions? Yes. In practice, what we're doing in therapy is exactly this. The problem is with the puppeteer, but we are dealing with the puppet. Emotions don't get sick. They simply change. Whether there is little or a lot of a particular emotion, it is still emotion. Just like how both a mildly spicy pepper and a very spicy one are both healthy peppers. Modern psychology and psychiatry consider these processes as disorders only if they meet two fundamental criteria, which are treated as illnesses in practice. These criteria for disorder illness are as follows. 1. The presence of 3-5 symptoms together. 2. The duration of more than 15 days. 3. The impact on daily functioning. Although other additional criteria may be mentioned on paper, in practice, these are the most commonly used measurements. However, none of these three core criteria are scientific or objective. Modern medicine does not only look at the appearance of symptoms and their impact on the individual. These symptoms must also indicate an underlying disease. For this reason, some tests are performed. If no anomaly or pathology is found underneath, the number of complaints and their effect on the person are not considered sufficient to classify the condition as a disease or justify treatment. The general principle in medicine is, if there is a disease, there is treatment. On the other hand, the fact that a psychological state lasts more than 15 days is not a valid measure. According to this criterion, the same psychological condition would be considered normal and healthy for 14 days and 23 hours. Being under financial debt or experiencing the winter season also psychologically affects individuals. Looking at the impact of everyday life, we would not label a psychological state as a debt disorder or a seasonal illness. As seen, one cannot simply label a psychology as a disorder or disease by looking at its formation and the effects it creates. There is also a very important detail here. Does a psychological impact that meets the above criteria mean the psychology is disordered or ill? Does a machine that hasn't been working for 15 days and negatively affects daily life automatically mean it is broken? Could it be that the power went out, or there was a loose connection in the plug? Is the psychological impact that emerges and meets the above criteria truly a result of the psychology, or is it related to the meaning attached to the psychology? In short, is it our emotions that are disordered or our perceptions of emotions? These psychological processes are absolutely not diseases. That is why they are referred to as disorders in professional books. A disorder does not indicate an underlying anomaly. It simply refers to a deviation from certain subjective measurements. For instance, when we say a culture is disordered, we do not mean the culture is medically ill. It means the culture has deviated from the values considered normal. For this reason, modern medicine first conducts tests to try to identify any underlying anomalies or pathologies. The presence, intensity, and number of symptoms alone are not sufficient to classify them as a disease. In fact, these psychological processes are not disorders either. There is nothing that is truly broken. Why would the duration or intensity of an emotion be considered a disorder? Almost all psychological conditions will improve on their own over time, even without intervention. Could a broken radio or television or a malfunctioning mechanism fix itself? Our mood can be off, but after a while, it can return to its original state on its own. We don't say our mood is ill, we say our mood is disturbed. This example may give us a clearer understanding of the difference between disorder and illness. Yes, are the emotions we experience, which we refer to as anxiety, depression, panic attacks, etc., disordered? Is that why they affect us? Can an emotion be disordered, or does it just change? For example, the primary emotion believed to affect a person in a panic attack is fear. During a panic attack, a series of psychophysiological responses emerge, and the person becomes afraid, beginning to experience fear attacks. Modern psychiatry and psychology accept that the symptoms of panic attacks, especially the increase in heart rate and the sudden onset of fear attacks, are the causes of this distressing psychological impact. Naturally, they try to alleviate the condition known as panic attacks, psychological or physiological symptoms, through medication and therapy. This is why they define the issue as panic disorder. Essentially, panic disorder means labeling the symptoms causing this condition, such as the heart palpitations, sudden fear attacks, and similar phenomena, as disorders. This is because a panic attack is a syndrome made up of various symptoms. However, the same heart palpitations can be seen when climbing stairs, but no psychological effect occurs there. This striking example shows that it is not the symptoms themselves, but the meaning attached to these symptoms that creates the psychology. Is it our fear emotion that is disordered, or is it our unrealistic and exaggerated perception of fear, our fear of fear, that is affecting us? Is it our anxiety emotion that is disordered, anxiety disorder, or is it our learned experiences and programming related to fearing anxiety itself? In short, is it our emotions that are disordered, or is it our perceptions? Modern psychology and psychiatry consider emotions to be disordered, even ill. However, in my original model called suggestion and persuasion therapy, I do not see emotions as disorders. I see all emotions as functional responses to disordered perceptions. I consider the perception to be disordered, not the emotion. Disorder and response are not the same thing. Shaking during an epileptic seizure is an illness. However, shaking in the cold is a healthy response to the cold. Psychology is actually a response to faulty perceptions, stemming from misprogramming in the past. The pain our stomach experiences in response to spoiled food, is that a disorder, or is it a healthy response? Yes, is the problem in our psychology or in our perception of psychology? Is the issue in the emotions we experience or in how we perceive those emotions? Are our psychologies broken or are our perceptions broken? If our perceptions are broken, why would responding with psychology to these broken perceptions make the reactions dysfunctional? For example, why would a person's reaction, creating a feeling of fear due to a distorted perception of a mouse as a snake, be considered a disordered emotion or an emotional disorder? If someone perceives a sudden heart palpitation at home as a danger or illness and then responds with psychology to this perception, should this be called panic attack, panic disorder, or should it be called a disorder in panic perception? Is the effect of a thought on us related to the thought being negative or disordered, or to our perception of that thought as negative or disordered? If a thought is perceived negatively and disordered, doesn't it affect the person? In this case, is it the thought that is disordered, or is it our perception of the thought that is disordered? Of course, the industry sometimes mentions perception, but it does not give perception a central role. It sees it as a secondary factor in solving the problem. Also, in the treatment and therapy of disordered emotions, perception is used as a tool. However, I am saying something different. I say that emotions and thoughts are not disordered. Rather, it is our perception of emotions and thoughts that is disordered. Which of these should I explain? I have been thinking about this for years, and I haven't seen much that is right in this field. I sat down and explained everything to the public through videos and books. Now thousands of people are solving their psychological problems at home. Where was the illness? Where was the broken psychology? Can illness be cured by watching a video or reading a book? The belief that I am ill produced psychology. The belief that I am not ill eradicated it. The name of the problem, whether it is a disease, disorder, or perception issue, is very important because it determines the approach. For example, if you associate a current tremor with cold, you solve it with a thick coat. If you associate it with epilepsy, you prescribe medical treatment. If you give medical treatment to someone shivering from the cold, they will continue to shiver and may even develop pneumonia. If you call an educational issue an infection issue, you will look for a solution in a clinic with antibiotics instead of in school. If you call an economic issue a surgical issue, you will take a person with debt to the operating table. If you call the puppeteer's issue a puppet issue, even if you tear apart the puppet, it will continue to move. Irrelevant treatment is ineffective treatment, or more precisely, it is treatment that worsens the process. Why couldn't you get better? Because you weren't sick, but you were receiving medical treatment. Medication treats illness. If there is no illness, what will the medication treat? And if there is illness, there is treatment. If there is no illness, what are we treating? Why couldn't you improve? Because it was your distorted perception, but you were being treated based on the belief that your emotions were disordered. It was your distorted perception, but they were medicating your emotions and thoughts. Can emotions be fought? Emotions are like our shadows. Those who fight their shadows only destroy themselves. I am not saying there is no problem. There is a problem. But I am saying this problem is not a disease or disorder. Saying a problem equals disease or disorder is not true. There are many types of problems. Educational problems, economic problems, social problems, spiritual problems, political problems, communication problems, medical problems, perception problems, and so on. Just because there is a problem does not mean it has to be a disorder or illness. A disorder is not a disease. The process you are experiencing is not even a disorder, let alone a disease. If the definition of the problem starts with a distortion, can the subsequent approach be correct and effective? Can a treatment be effective if the diagnosis is wrong? If you call an ulcer appendicitis, no matter how many surgeries you have, what's the use? If problems that cannot be solved in clinics are being solved in homes, with the philosophy of psychologist İzzet Güllü, isn't it time to rethink everything from scratch? Indeed, if the psychological states we experience are neither disorders nor diseases, and if what affects us is not our psychology itself but our perception of it, then how do our current psychological states form? Let's say there is a sudden outburst, and the organism reacts to it with a feeling of fear. This fear is not a disorder of emotion, but rather a protective reflex. When a person feels fear, they take precautions. The cause of this fear-producing emotion is not a drop in serotonin levels, childhood family experiences, or past traumas. It is simply our perception of danger. In fact, it is not the explosion itself that scares us, but our perception of this explosion as a threat. After a while, when we learn that the explosion is not a weapon but dynamite, we change our perception based on this new information, and then our emotion changes as well. The same sound will no longer trigger the same emotion in us. While the explosion continues, it no longer produces the same emotional response. This is because the issue is not with the event itself, but with our perception of it. Just as the effect is not the sound itself, but our interpretation of it, what truly affects us is not our psychology, but how we perceive it. Similarly, someone who views a particular emotion as a problem will experience it differently than someone who sees the same emotion simply as an emotion. If we constantly label a person as negative, disordered, sick, or bad, two things will happen. Our perception of that person will deteriorate, and we will begin to feel uncomfortable around them. We won't want to be in the same room with that person for even 2 minutes. Our tolerance for them will decrease. What happened in this example? First, a psychology was created through the coding of the individual. Then, through this coding, our tolerance was reduced. This is how the industry creates psychologies, turning us into fragile, overly sensitive individuals who cannot even tolerate experiencing the most basic human emotions for 2 days. As a result, problems increase. By telling us to focus on our psychology, it makes us act as guards over our own minds and souls. Psychology is made to be something we must give attention to so that special help can be sought. People are told that unless they recognize their own psychology, they won't seek help. Then, the focus is shifted with concepts like serotonin, trauma, and childhood experiences. Weren't there traumas before? Didn't serotonin exist before? Didn't childhood experiences exist before? Why weren't these issues so widespread in the past? The issues have become more widespread in the last 20 years, primarily due to the spread of poison in the form of media like TV and the internet, which have reached every corner of society. That's why the number of problems has risen in parallel with the number of so-called specialists.